fact it's very, very overrated.
Hello and welcome back to Strike Rate, the Cricket Analytics podcast, where we have actually coincidentally been talking about strike rate. We were talking about who was average. We didn't talk about anyone who was down near the bottom in terms of strike rate. And there's a few quite big names and a few that have been, have popped up in the IPL recently. Kane Williamson and Tim Seifert both had 22 innings in the last 3 years in major T20 comps. One striking at 102, one striking at 101.7. So, that's not taking into account international cricket and as Dan was saying before, the break the Super Smash, but they probably want to be a little bit better. Washington Sundar, also another basement dweller, 109. Not great. We can deconstruct strike rate a little bit, and I think it's really useful to do this as well. Because it gives you a profile of what a batter's innings looks like. And the way we can deconstruct strike rate. There's too many K's in these sentences. I think it's doing something to my brain. Is by having a look at different phases of a batter's innings, and two that you'll see somewhat regularly, and these are quite instructive for different roles in T20 cricket, are 5-ball strike rate and 10-ball strike rate. Dan, can you give us an idea of what they are and how you might use them and whether they are any good, whether they're interesting, whether they help to analyze the game?
Yeah. So first of all, probably worth mentioning as well that these are stats that you're not going to get on some players' random cricket info page. These are things that you're going to delve a bit deeper to find. Now, yeah. So of course, it's a useful measure actually for even for planning the opposition, because you want to know if someone's a fast starter or a slow starter on a general basis when you're planning strategies. So, for example, let's say you've got a player who strikes at 150 off his first 10 balls, which is way above average. There's probably, I guess you've got the exact numbers there, Jack, but that's going to be a really high percentile for the best players in the world for the first 10 balls. Well, you're going to want to look at ways where you can try and stem their run scoring very, very early in their innings to get them frustrated, chewing up balls, which they don't want to do because it's against their natural style. Whereas, let's say you've got a guy who's always starts slow, pretty much, as a general rule, maybe an 80 strike rate in their first 10 balls. Well, actually, that's not such a key consideration in terms of stemming the runs, because they're going to stem their own runs anyway. So we can look at, you might want to prioritize, for example, the batter at the other end in terms of matchups, because that the person who's a slow starter early innings, when they are early innings, is not going to hurt you that much. So there are tactical and strategic considerations involved in that in terms of the pre-match planning basis, and this is probably one of the first metrics that we've looked at in this episode, where we've started now to look at metrics where a good analyst or a good strategist would start to take into account and look at ways of implementing that into a tactical preview for a captain or coach.
So we'll do 10-ball strike rate first. We might talk a little bit about 5-ball, but obviously it's you can in your own head think about the relevance of that. And the mean benchmark for a 10-ball strike rate is 1.09. So in other words, the average number of runs scored off a batter's first 10 balls is 11 or 10.9, which isn't that high. Like it's not a ridiculously high threshold to reach, and many players sort of are doing that. More than 50% of players actually strike a little bit faster than that in their first 10 balls. If you want to be in the elite range, you also don't have to be like ludicrously high here. 1.37 runs per ball over your first 10 balls. So if you want to translate that into strike rate, a strike rate of 137 in your first 10 balls makes you elite. And like outright bad is 0.92, or replacement level. Maybe not outright bad. That's maybe a little bit harsh. But replacement level would be a 0.92. So here we're actually talking about a difference of sort of 4 runs between the replacement level player and the absolute elite, which is quite a lot of runs, I would say, in sort of 10 balls. Some names
on a per ball basis, it's huge.
Yeah. Some names that you're going to need to kind of give you an idea of who is good here. Mohammed Harris, mentioned him just before the break on strike rate. He's the kingpin. 1.806 runs per ball from his first 10 balls. He's actually going down. Like it's it's sort of inverse. Remember as well here that when you narrow down when you narrow things down for a stat like this, the sample size is a lot smaller. So this is off just 200 balls from Mohammed Harris. So if he went nuts once, like that will have a relatively outsized effects on this measure. But it's still really good. Jitesh Sharma's up there. Jamie Overton, is a masher. Tom Curran. Will Jacks, and England's torturer of the moment, Yashasvi Jaiswal, all players above 1.5 as well. So, all excellent. Finn Allendan, one for you, 1.502. So another really good starter here. And you kind of see a little bit of a split. And this is another point about roles. You kind of see a split here between guys who I would kind of call power play exploiters and guys who are batting down the order as kind of your death over sloggers. That's yeah. There aren't many of the anchor type players that really value their wicket highly at the top of this list. And it's interesting. I really went deep on this when I was doing the analysis, and you can see how this changes through the innings. So if you look at what the average 10 ball strike rate is in each over of an innings, it starts quite high. So in the power play, the first 3 overs, batters are quite aggressive, and then it dips down below 1 for the middle overs of the innings, where you see people starting a lot more slowly, maybe a little bit worried about wicket preservation, and then it spikes way up again in the last 3 overs. So that kind of fits the profile, I guess, of what I was talking about there. One player I wanted to talk about, and this is with respect to 5 ball strike rate. I'll give you an opportunity really quickly, Dan, to give us your thoughts on that. But then there's a specific player I want to talk about on 5 ball strike rate, who I think is well worth a discussion. So 5 ball strike rate v 10 ball strike rate, what's the difference? And is it telling us anything more useful than the bigger measure?
Well, they're going to be linked fairly closely. I would imagine that the players who are in the top 10% for 10 ball strike rate, a lot of them are going to feature in the top 10% for 5 ball strike rate as well, because effectively this is all about how a player starts their innings, how they construct their innings to start with. And the 5 ball strike rate will just be much more. Will they literally go to hit from ball 1, or will the 10 ball strike rate at least might factor in a couple of sighters, or look to get off the mark, or whatever rotational shots, first couple of balls before then looking to attack. So 5 ball strike rate is going to be even more explosive. I've got a feeling, and we haven't prepped this at all, but I've got a feeling I know who you're going to talk about here, Jack.
Who do you think I'm going to talk about?
Rashid Khan.
No, I wasn't going to talk about Rashid Khan, but if you've got something to say about Rashid Khan, you do that first. I was going to talk about something else.
Very, very highly rated for this.
I will let you know. Sorry, I have to find his name on the list. Yeah, he's really good. He's top 5%, maybe even a little bit higher than that. Yeah, top 5%. His 5 ball strike rate is 1.3, which is excellent. I don't think I did the baseline stats for 5 ball strike rate. 0.98 is the mean benchmark, which 60% of players are achieving. So some people are dragging this one down. It's the reverse effect of strike rate overall. Yeah. To be elite, 1.28 is the threshold. So, Rashid Khan is way over that. The player I was going to talk about, though, is at the other end of this scale. And it's the guy from the intro. It's King Legend, KL Rahul, who is like, he's not just the worst. He's like off the scale worse than everyone else over 5 balls. Scores at 0.7 runs per ball across his 5 balls. So if you look at that versus the average, which is 0.98, which 60% of players are doing.
Mm.
This it's hard to say that this isn't. It doesn't exactly work like this, but he's costing his team 0.3 runs per ball over those 5 balls, which means by the time KL Rahul has got to 5 balls, he's 1.5 runs behind where the average player would be. That's a big hole to be putting your team in, and this is over. By the way, this is over 59 innings.
Power play as well. So I guess
this is in the power play. Yeah,
the average in the power play is probably even higher. The difference between him and the average is even higher.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, it starts high, so it starts at So the first over 5 ball strike rate, if that makes sense, which it should do. I think people can understand words. Is about 1.05. So he's actually 0.35 runs behind. So what does that work out?
Two runs in 5 balls behind.
Yeah, and that's a big cost. So this is over 15. So over 59 innings, he's cost his team 100 runs basically, which is probably a couple of wins that teams that KL Rahul have played on haven't got because of that little window. Now, because he is he's right up the top for balls per dismissal, and he plays quite long innings, gets a 50 very regularly, and does accelerate in his innings. He will himself sometimes make up that difference, but it's an unavoidable fact that he is having to make up those 2 runs. And I think when you're thinking about some of these stats and what that means for the rest of the team and pressure and how the run rate will change, and actually the very fine margins that we're talking about in T20 cricket, like 2 runs doesn't sound like that much, but we're actually talking about 2 runs from average. So if the average innings is 165, and I've just thrown that number out there, I haven't actually checked that, but if the average innings is 165, KL Rahul's first 5 balls are dragging that average innings down to 162, which ultimately then that means losses, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also I think what we haven't even brought into the discussion yet is what I call like a reverse assist. So like for example, has the fact that he starts slowly, or just using him as an example, but because he's any batter who starts slowly, does that have an implication on the way that their teammates play? Does that put them under pressure to score quickly at the other end because they know that as a team they're below a scoring rate, either to set or to chase? And I think it's quite understated among a lot of people who watch T20 cricket that what your mate is doing at the other end actually has an impact on how you might play. And so is he then encouraging his teammates to play a higher risk game than perhaps they might want to because of these sort of catch-up tactics that he's employing?
Yeah, I mean, my theory on that would be yes. Like, if you play that way, then if you think of T20 cricket as a pure efficiency game, like how efficient can you be per ball in terms of the runs you score, everyone else has to be more efficient if you're going to bat like that.
Yeah.
Like,
so
how?
Sorry.
Go on.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I was going to say, what that means is they have to take more risks, which means they're more likely to get out, and that's the reverse assist. What were you going to say?
Well, so basically, something that I've found works really well when discussing this stuff with players is that, let's say, for sake of argument, you've got a guy who's 30 off 30 in a chase of 200, just plucking random numbers out of the air, right? Now, that means that if someone's 30 out of 30 in a 200 chase, their teammates, with extras thrown in as well, have got to strike at 189 to win.
Yeah,
so
it's a lot.
That shows you the impact of that innings on the rest of your teammates.
That's faster than anyone in the data set that we've
exactly.
kind of been using for this discussion.
So
that's faster than Mohammed Harris and Heinrich Klaasen and Will Jacks.
That shows you the difficulty that teams have when someone chews up the balls.
Yeah, so there's that. Also, I mean, like, just as a final point on this, it gives you a little bit of an insight into the shape of an individual's innings as well. But as we talk about things like strike rate, which gives you the overall picture, but it doesn't tell you what they're doing in their first 10 balls or their next 10 balls or their next 10 balls after that, or how they're actually constructing that big round number. So I think KL Rahul's strike rate was about average. I haven't got that specifically up in front of me, but I think it was about 135, maybe a touch below that. So you can see that he must be ramping up, but he's ramping up from a position of disadvantage, causing problems for everyone else in his team. And even factoring in that ramp up, he might be ramping up at a time when someone else would be able to score at that rate anyway. Like an opener doing really well at the death, it's great, but there are players at 6 and 7 and 5 whose job it is to also do really well at the death, and you're not necessarily scoring more runs than you would have done with those guys teeing off, like KL Rahul teeing off versus the number 6 teeing off. They might be producing the same number of runs at that period in the game, but King Legend batting slow earlier is irretrievable. Like that's someone else might have been batting faster. So things to think about. Dan, we've got a few more bits to get through. It is going to be a slightly long show, so we've got things that you talk about a lot. In terms of strike rate, ball boundary strike rates, boundary percentages. One thing I want to get to just before that is non-boundary strike rate, though. So to set up the boundary conversation, can we talk non-boundary strike rate? In fact, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take a quick break and then we'll do that, because otherwise this is going to be a really long part 3. Cool. So we'll be back in a moment.